Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the massive Jerusalem wildfires finally coming under control, but the depth of the destruction unimaginable. Meanwhile, the IDF preventing a breach along the northern Israeli-Lebanon border, but from inside Israel towards Lebanon. Stay tuned for the surprising reasons. And finally, an incredible discovery just north of Tel Aviv. Yet new evidence of action in the area as far back as 1,500 years ago. Starting tonight with some bittersweet news, the fires around Jerusalem have been put out. Most residents allowed to return home and no citizens have died, but the damages are immense.
I think that the situation is under control. All the night we covered all the area and tried to fight with the small fires that we have in all the region. This is the main situation that we have here. To my humble opinion, I think that the firefighters doing a great job in fighting with the fire all over Jerusalem. We defend now the hospital of Hadassah and Karem that the fire will not get there, with a lot of firefighters all over, and with the firefighters, fighters that we have in the air, and we combined all this together with the IDF, with the Homeland Security of the IDF, with the police, and I think that we are doing a good job. It's very hard, but we are on it.
Israelis applauding emergency service members as they wrestle with the remaining embers of one of the nation's largest ever wildfires. Over 20 water bombers and specially outfitted planes, and roughly 1,500 firefighters, including from the Palestinian Authority and abroad, included in the efforts lasting over 52 long hours. But Fire and Rescue Services Commissioner Dadi Simchi is announcing Tuesday evening that the blaze had finally been contained. All residents in the area allowed to return to their homes, with the exception of patients at the Eitanim Hospital and specific homes in Ramat Raziel and Givat Ye'arim. Still, a feeling of unease remaining among the ashes. Over 6,000 acres, or nearly 9.5 square miles of land, have been devastated, and officials are putting blame in human hands. Investigations are still ongoing, though, as to whether it was by negligence or intention. On a related note, with nearly 9.5 square miles around Jerusalem up in smoke, from the treetops to the roots, experts are expecting the area's recovery to span decades. Hundreds of thousands of animals are believed to have perished in the fire, and long-term air pollution and ecological damages are predicted. Joining me to discuss is Tzlil Labin, ecologist with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority Central District. Thanks so much for being with us, Tzlil. Now, how long do you predict that it will take to rehabilitate the area, and what kind of damages are we looking at?
Thank you for having me here. Well, I think it's a pretty complicated question to answer, since there are rehabilitation systems that will take less time, and there are systems that will take longer. If we want a tree to reach its main height, so we'll have to wait another 100 years or 90 years, opposing to the age of the tree. But I believe we'll be seeing lower vegetation recovering within the nearest winter or spring, but we won't expect to get all the same plants that we did have before. Neither all the reptiles and insects that are just perished in this fire, and that would take several years, if not more. If we're talking about lower vegetation, so that may take a season or two. If we're talking about bushes, that may take 3 or 4 years till we see recovery starting. And for trees, it also depends, of course, on the severity of the fire in that area. It depends how strong it was. It depends if we still have seeds in the ground, or maybe the fire was just so very strong that the seeds were burnt as well. And of course, to sum that up, trees take longer. And then if we talk about the animals, so it differs. It differs if we, like big mammals, they will migrate to areas if they can, as long as they can run fast enough. They will migrate to areas where they still can get reach of fresh vegetation and fresh and habitats that were untouched by the fire. And then they will come back when the ecosystem starts recovering. So I guess we'll have to start from the beginning. We'll have to wait for the lower vegetation to start, and then insects, and then after them, they actually built the system from the bottom, and after them we'll get the higher bushes, and we'll get birds coming back to nest, but that will take a few years.
So what is the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, the INPA, and organizations like KKL-JNF and volunteers doing in the aftermath of these fires? And what needs to be done? How can Israelis and maybe people, help in the rehabilitation?
One of the main things that we see is that this area was very, very dense with plants, and that is more than it should be in natural habitats that we know in the area. And also one of the main aspects that we look at is the very high density of the pine trees. So pine trees are not good for fires. They lit up very fast and they throw their pine cones very far away. And that way, the fire can just take place and cover very big areas. They're not local to most of our lands, and of course not in that density. And this is one thing that we need to take care of. As for villages and settlements, they will have to have buffer areas which can give for the settlements and also take down trees that are very close to the settlements in order to create those buffer areas. These are recommendations that were written several years ago for the Carmel and also even for Jerusalem mountains, but not all of them were set in the field.
Tzliel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now heading to Israel's southern border, Israeli tax authority officials confiscating some 23 tons of chocolate bars heading to the Gaza Strip earlier this week. And the shipment was intercepted on its way to Gaza as it passed into Israel from Egypt at the Nitzana border crossing, because apparently the chocolate was intended to help directly fund Hamas terrorism. Think Girl Scout cookie fundraisers, but for rockets instead of a nice camping trip. In fact, IDF intel revealing that the order for the chocolate bars coming from importers working alongside two Gazan companies belonging to the Shamlach family, the Al-Mutahidun Currency Exchange and Arab al-Sin, both of which are categorized by Israel as terror groups that use their sales to finance Hamas's military wing. And this as further evidence that Hamas has overtaken Gaza's import industry with respect to even the most basic commodities, all in order to bypass Israeli and international sanctions and blockades to fund the terror group. Defense Minister Benny Gantz, though, saying that Israel will continue to pursue terrorism's funding no matter what form it takes. Meantime, with respect to active terror attacks on Monday, Israel saw the first rocket fire from Gaza since the 11-day war with Hamas in May ended. Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists firing 2 rockets towards southern Israeli civilian communities, with the Iron Dome intercepting one of them. However, Jerusalem continuing to refrain from responding militarily, at least for now, and apparently due to the ongoing but fragile ceasefire negotiations with Hamas. In fact, IDF intelligence and Shin Bet officials are reportedly telling Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Defense Minister Benny Gantz to hold back for the sake of the deal, which, if reached, could largely benefit both sides. Qatari funding would be allowed to enter Gaza, for one, and more importantly, the Israelis currently being held by Hamas would be released. Further, Hamas likewise trying to keep negotiations on the table by immediately arresting the Islamic Jihad members who took responsibility for the rockets. Still, Bennett is promising that all terror attacks will receive a response later, if not sooner.
מטרת הביקור כאן היה לראות שצה"ל, פיקוד הדרום ואוגדת עזה נערכים והם אכן ערוכים כראוי. המשימה שלנו היא לתת ביטחון ארוך טווח לתושבי הדרום ולתושבי עוטף עזה. אנחנו נפעל בזמן, במקום ובתנאים שמתאימים לנו ולא לאף אחד אחר. מבחינתנו הכתובת בעזה היא חמאס, לא סוררים ולא אף אחד אחר, אלא חמאס.
Bennett's later statements referring to how Israel holds Hamas responsible for all attacks from Gaza, as Hamas is the governing group in the Strip. And now moving north, Syrian state media reporting that Israeli missiles struck a military outpost in the Quneitra province of southwestern Syria Tuesday night. And the outpost, near the Druze town of Hadar, allegedly belonging to Iranian terror proxy Hezbollah, with the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights corroborating that Iranian-backed militias were operating from that same site. Additionally, it's worth noting that this is not the first time this outpost has been targeted, with reports of a similar attack dating back to July 2018. The IDF still keeping close to the vest, though, with respect to active operations in Syrian territory. And in any case, no casualties have so far been announced from the overnight strikes. Only material damages, largely resulting from a fire that broke out. In other news, Israeli Defense Forces preventing a breach along the northern border with Lebanon, but the attempt coming from inside Israel and not the other way around. Israeli farmers across the region in protest against pending agricultural and economic reforms, which they argue will destroy their livelihoods. And the protesters, one of whom was arrested, apologizing for endangering the IDF, but saying that nothing else was getting enough attention. In any case, with me now to analyze is Dr. Alex Coman, value creation expert from the Academic College in Tel Aviv, Jaffa. Dr. Coman, thanks so much for being with us. Now, if the reforms are approved, Israel's agriculture industry would have to conform to European quality standards. Also, import tariffs and the like will be greatly reduced to increase competition. The idea being to drive down the costs for consumers. But farmers say that the greedy supermarkets are actually to blame for the high prices, and that these reforms will destroy the local farming industry. How do you respond?
Well, first of all, like always, it's of course yes and no. On one hand, it's true that there are several very powerful supermarket chains that dictate very low prices for the farmers, and the farmers are frustrated because they see that the prices for the final consumer are high. If you look here and you see prices something like 19 or 20 shekels, the farmer might receive something like 2 shekels, which is extremely frustrating for them. And with tariffs being reduced, they predict that there would be imports of products such as tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots from Turkey, for instance. In Turkey, vegetables are going to be very, very cheap because the Turks have a lot of water, infinite land, and labor is very cheap. So Israeli farmers are really concerned about that.
So what is the average profit margin in the agriculture industry? Have farmers not been able to jack up the prices at all? Is it really all the doing of the supermarkets?
No. In fact, the interesting thing is that when you look at some products, you would see exorbitant margins, but this is usually for commodity products, like I said, carrots, cucumbers, things like that, where Israeli agriculture does not have any significant advantage. On the other hand, if you look at watermelon, if you look at other products where Israel, grapes, for instance, seedless grapes, where Israel agriculture really excels in the world, these are areas where you do not see such exorbitant margins. So the point is the following. We want Israeli agriculture to be, first of all, to exist. And that's the reason actually why they did this on the northern border, because they want to show we are growing agriculture near the borders. We are absorbing all the animosity from Lebanon or from Gaza. So that's a point. But they should be growing products that Israel has competitive advantage in. So Israel has very sophisticated agriculture. And actually, the tariffs should not be eliminated right away. They should be gradually reduced so that Israeli agriculture is slowly exposed to competition. Products where we do not have competitive advantage should be imported, and the farmers should concentrate on the products where we excel. And this way, everybody would be happy. We would have excellent vegetables, not with exorbitant prices, and farmers would have nice profits, and it will be a win-win situation.
So I wanted to ask, though, another issue with this, which even the farmers have alluded to, was the idea that Israel should remain ultimately self-sufficient with respect to food for security purposes. Is that at all endangered?
Yes. Well, we should not take this card too seriously. The point is the following. Sometimes when Israel was under a rocket attack from Gaza, for instance, or from Lebanon, we observed that for instance, most airlines stopped flying to Israel. So the farmers argue that if we are not autonomous in such situations, there would be a shortage of vegetables. So I agree with them completely that yes, we should have Israeli agriculture. We should have Israeli farmers. And by the way, all over the world, farmers are being subsidized. However, there's too much of a good thing. For instance, if you think about eggs and if you think about milk, we see very powerful agricultural monopolies. And these monopolies cause situations where you are not allowed, for instance, you yourself are not allowed to grow a cow in your living room or have chickens there because you do not have a quota. Isn't that painful? So as a result, they curtail the supply. When you don't have enough supply, prices shoot to the sky. So this should not be the case.
All right. Well,
everything should be competitive, first of all, within the walls of Israel. And this way we would have reasonable prices and everybody would be happy.
All right. Well, we know that Avigdor Lieberman, the finance minister, is also going after breaking up some of these monopolies and some of these big supermarket chains to drive down the price further. And he's not only relying on the agriculture industry itself. So we'll see how all of this goes. I must say I'm very disappointed to know that I cannot grow my own cow or chickens at home. That's a blow. To my small apartment, we need a chicken in my apartment. But in any case, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for being with us.
Good day. Bye-bye.
Now, moving now to our daily coronavirus update. Renewed green and purple pass restrictions are setting in Wednesday morning, and booster shots are showing great progress with stymieing the spread of the virus. But infections are still rising at a dangerous spread rate of roughly 6%, with over 8,500 new cases confirmed overnight. And coronavirus czar Professor Zalman Zarka now recommending that the government quickly increase restrictions ahead of the coming high holidays in September. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
Israel on Wednesday reinstating regulations on gatherings and on social distancing in businesses. The so-called green and purple pass systems that limit indoor events to 50 people and outdoor events to 100. They also limit how many people per square meter can enter a storefront, like those in malls. They require all patrons to wear masks indoors, and all the rules have been extended to everyone 3 years old and above. But this, not without merit. COVID-19 infections still rising dramatically every day. Nearly 1 million Israelis, or 1 in 9, have been infected since the start of the pandemic, active cases standing at over 55,300, at least 559 of whom are in serious condition, and the death toll rising by 13 overnight to 6,694. On the other hand, infections increasingly skewing towards the unvaccinated, in particular the serious cases. In fact, unvaccinated patients are 8 times more likely than the vaccinated to develop serious symptoms and complications. And this, among other stats, providing material proof for the benefits of the third dose booster shots, especially among the elderly. Doctors at Sheba Medical Center predicting that the morbidity in this demographic is likely to halt within 2 weeks. The plan to return to school then remaining among the top agenda items in need of fine-tuning. Ministers agreeing on the plan to have students in red cities continue learning remotely, but Education Minister Yifat Shasha Biton still preventing the plan to vaccinate students during school hours, even with parental consent. Arguing that Biton is effectively hobbling the plan then, Attorney General Mandelblit working on an order that would allow the health ministry to bypass Biton's rule.
Our final story tonight, huge news from central Israel. Ramat HaSharon, just north of Tel Aviv, celebrating its 100th anniversary, but life in the area going back at least 1,500 years to the time of the Byzantine Empire. At least this according to new evidence unearthed by Israel Antiquities authorities. The discovery including a large wine press, a gold coin, and a bronze chain. Of course, for more details, we turn now to our favorite archaeological segment, Can You Dig It? With Israeli tour guide Anat Harel. Anat, welcome back. This thing happens a lot in Israel, doesn't it?
Yes, hi, Aaron. Great to see you again. Yes, it happens all the time. You know, people start building things and construction all over Israel, and they have to invite the Israel Antiquities Authority to check out the place just to make sure that there's nothing there. And most of the time they find archaeological remains all over the place. Yes.
How often does that, severely delay building plans? I feel like it's a lot.
Well, it depends. It depends what they find. You're praying, oh, please don't find anything important. But when they find something that is significant, then either it delays it, but also many times the actual people that are building have to change their plan or choose to change their plans a little bit in order to adapt to the new environment of archaeology right there in the middle. And it actually creates some beautiful, beautiful projects that are put together. And it's this combination of ancient and modern that's actually the trend these days that goes in a cooperation between the Israel Antiquities Authority and all of the municipalities that are trying to build.
Wow, so one day in this Ramat Sharon area, we could have the remains of an ancient city right in the mix with the new city that they're building there, which is very cool. All right, so what do you believe will be done, though, with all of these excavations now that the neighborhood will be built?
Well, so first of all, they have to finish the excavations. And then I am sure that the people building the neighborhood will have to adapt and maybe create an archaeological park with beautiful lawns and pathways and archaeological finds placed all over the place, or even a visitor center to say, like a little museum in the middle of the neighborhood, or whatever they want to build. The Israel Antiquities Authority is very happy to collaborate with the different villages and cities that are trying to connect the local today's community with the ancient past. And so there's many different examples of different projects that enhance the both.
So I guess let's talk a little bit now about what the discovery itself was. We have a wine press, we have gold coins with Greek and or Arabic on it. I read, and then we have a bronze chain that used to hold like a chandelier of some sort.
Right, a chandelier that probably hung in a church. So we're talking about finds from the 5th and 6th centuries, which were the Byzantine times in the land. The Byzantine times were Christian. The majority of people were Christian. However, they found a coin that has the year 638 or 639 on it. That is exactly the year that the Islamic armies arrived and conquered the land. So it's right on the cusp between the Christian times and the Islamic times. So it's actually very interesting, right there on the seam between the two.
Wow, and then and this gold coin seemingly reflects that change, because as I said, I understand that it has 2 languages inscribed on it.
Right. It's got the year on it, and it has something in Greek and something in Arabic on it as well. So it's also Byzantine and
very cool.
Used for both empires.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, yeah. I'm loving all these exciting finds, and I'm sure that we're going to find another one because we're always developing in Israel, as we've said. Anat, until the next Can You Dig It segment, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron.
And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral here in Israel. Wow. Well, that's awesome. Holy shit. Our next Israeli Olympian, I guess? Wow. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.